Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart. Necromunda Halls of the Ancients are here, and Games Workshop very kindly sent me a few bits to look at. So let's paint some squat trikes.
Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Baron of Dice, premium wargaming dice. Over 500 styles, over 4,000 customer reviews. Welcome to the best dice on the planet. Now, I'm old enough to remember squats looking like this, and I had quite a few of them. I absolutely loved them. Had them along with Imperial Guard, as they were called back then, and they formed part of a teenager's 40k road trader army. And I had plenty of trikes and bikes as well, and they were pretty much missing from the Warhammer wider universe until more recently through the leagues of Votann, and also squats through Necromunda, of course. But up until now, we've not had cool trikes with wheels. We've had the hovering versions that you have with the Votann in 40k. But with the Halls of the Ancients, they're back. And they're different, but they're still trikes, and from my point of view, they really seem to capture that feel of the original models while looking completely different. I don't know what it is, it's hard to put my finger on it, but they've definitely got that vibe, and I'm super excited to paint these. So these are on pre-order at the time of recording this, so thank you very much Games Workshop for sending me these sets to have a look at. I've got some prospectors as well, so you look out for those in a future video, and I've already teased the pictures of these painted on a couple of groups as well, so you may already have seen them, but I thought as they were brand new miniatures I would just take a quick look inside the box and give my general thoughts. And I'm going to be really simple about it. These are modern Games Workshop miniatures, really highly engineered, really easy to put together. The frames in the box, there's two of them, they're identical, lots of spare parts, there's lots of spare heads and different options there, and I'm already looking at a future Votann box and thinking about when I can start using some of these more squat looking parts and get them on there and have a squat themed Votann army. And they build up nicely. I've got them primed black, ready to go. The rider's separate just so I could get to them a little bit easier. Now I'm going to start with two thin coats card Charadon grey, and I'm going to do it through the airbrush, but I rather stupidly positioned my camera just right in the firing line of my airbrush through most of this sequence. So do forgive me, you think after making over 400 videos that I've got my head around this right now, but I do make mistakes like this often, silly me. Essentially what I'm doing is doing a very light build-up of grey, actually leaving some of that black in the shadows, just to build up the armor plates, which I want to be white. The rest of it I'm not really doing much on at all. Now if you don't have an airbrush, some of those new soft style dry brushes will be perfect for this. Just light circular motions gently building up the grey. But what you'll see or not see really is a slight grayscale effect on those panels. I've added a little bit to the seat, which will be leather as well, just to lighten it up and make it easier to paint. And I'm actually allowing a little bit of a dusting of the grey to go over the tyres just at the top as well. I'm going to do a really simple method on those. For the crewman, I've got the grey in the airbrush, so I'm going to build up a grey layer as well, mostly because of the armour. I want that to be white as well, but also because the rest of the miniature, I'm going to use it to build up like a Zenithal underpainting method, which I do for a lot of my paint jobs. So I've got the grey in there, I may as well build it up with grey all over. So mostly top down, allowing all that black to stay in the recesses, allow it to create lots of natural shadow for you. So if you have glazed layers later on, it really helps you with the initial painting stages. Now for the white layer, and I'm using Vallejo Model Air White, mostly because it's super easy to use, slightly thinned in the airbrush cut with a bit of thinner, and it just goes through the airbrush like a treat. Some whites take a little bit more of fiddling around with, and this is just one of the easiest to use out there. So if you are relatively new to airbrushing, I'll definitely recommend it as a product. Focusing in the centre of those armour panels, trying not to obliterate all the grey that's there. I want a bit of a transition building up to white in the centre. Again, if you're dry brushing, you can do that with a soft dry brush as well. When it comes to the squat himself, I'm focusing the white in the same way on those armour panels, very much from top down, so you've got that lighting effect, but a little bit of dust overspray on other parts of the miniature as well, so you've got a Zenithal underpaint as well is perfect, and it just works really well. That's the end of me getting the airbrush in front of the camera, for this video at least. So this is decayed metal, which is a coppery brown metal from scale colour. And I'm going to base coat in all of the metallics on the whole of the trike using this colour. I don't always use this as a base tone for metals, but when it's going to be a dirty, grimy metal, I really like to have that brown that just shows through the other layers of metallics, and you'll see that a little bit later on, and that's why I've chosen to start with this rather than a more standard steel-based colour. It's just a matter of working my way around everything I want to be plain metallic on that trike, and that's pretty much everything that's left other than the tyres and those armour panels. Now for some contrast Black Legion. I do thin this just a touch, probably 2 parts Black Legion, 1 part water. I'm just using water here. And I'm starting at the tops of those tyres and then blending down, and this is why I allowed there to be a bit of overspray. Because of contrast paints and the way they run into the recesses and away from those raised areas, you actually get a little bit of a highlight on the detail on the tread of this tyre. And that's all I'm going to do to these until I add effects at the end. There's no point in spending ages highlighting black tyres when they're going to be covered in powders and pigments and things, and this just gives you a nice base to work from. And that's really the ethos of much of this video here, is to keep things simple where you can. There's no point in overcomplicating things when you can get great effects for simple methods, and it definitely makes it easy to reproduce them. It will still be a striking miniature because of the white and some of the other areas. I'm also using, while we're here, the black on the jeans as well. This is a Kellen green contrast paint. I love this colour. There's quite a few greeny blues in this range of contrast paints, and they're all great. I'm using this over that flak armour, that padded armour around his jacket, and it's perfect because we've got this Zenithal underpaint already on this miniature, and this paint just runs into those recesses. It's really quite rich, but runs away from the surfaces really well. It looks brilliant already without doing any further highlighting, and some people may well just leave it like that. I will come back and do some future highlights, but I just love this colour. Now for some contrast, I am doing yellow. I wanted a spot colour on the white army, which I may follow over to a whole force later on. I've got thoughts of making these into some kind of Votan army for 40k as well as Necromunda. So I decided on yellow for the spot colour, and I wanted it quite bright and vibrant rather than too ochre-y. So I've gone for this kind of mid to bright yellow rather than what I'd normally do, which would quite often go for a Nasdrag yellow at this stage. So I'm just painting in a stripe on the top of the helmet at this stage. Now it's a case of just adding a little bit of masking so I get a nice straight line on the side of the trike itself. I probably didn't need to do this. I could have done this with brush control, but it just shows what you can do. You don't have to use masking just when you're using an airbrush. And maybe I'd had too many drinks over the Christmas period and my hands are a little bit shakier than normal. I decided to use the mask in this instance. So with all that dry, it's time to move on to the next stage, and this is black metal from the same scale colour range that the decayed metal came from. And the idea now is to start to build up those metal tones all over the miniature, where all that sort of brown copperish decayed metal is. And this is from Knott's Hobbies. It's a sponging tool. There's their texture board as well. I'm actually using some of the sponges that they send out with them. So quite often when I do sponge chipping and things like that, I'll be using the sponge you find in blister packs, which is a little bit more porous. This stuff is quite densely packed, a bit more like a makeup brush, I am told, or makeup sponge rather, and it's really quite good. You can sponge on and it gives you a really nice sort of smooth effect, and you can build up by layers. When you've got a tight area like this that maybe in the past I would have airbrushed in sub-assemblies and trying to mask off the armour and trying to mask off the wheels and things like that, but it just gets very, very faffy and very complicated for something that you want to reproduce quickly. So sponging on this metallic like this, you've got loads of control, you've got straight edges there on that sponge, so you can really choose where you place it, and it just builds up the steel colour but leaving some of that brown showing through, which gives it that depth in colour which I mentioned at the beginning. And there you are, you can see that brown coppery colour showing through, but also there's a nice tone of metal there. So now we're moving on to Game Air Silver, and these are all my favourite metallic paints. So if you've watched my videos before, you'd have heard me say stuff like this before, and also apologise for using the same colours, but I love them. Now I'm dry brushing here, so I want a slightly different effect. I really want to catch the edges and be a little bit more subtle than the sponge will give me even. So very tiny amount on the tip of this brush. really take most of the brush back off onto that texture palette and just focusing there where that light is hitting at the top, so catching those edges, catching just at the tops, also the edges of some of the armor as well, where the paint would wear away from use, people climbing in and out, bumping into things, that kind of stuff. It's amazing what kind of effect that can have, just adding a little silver dry brush to the edge. For those of you who don't like to spend hours edge highlighting as well, for armor edges, a little dry brushing like this, if you want something to look weathered and used and beaten up, this is a really good, quick, cheaty way of doing it. This is Contrast Garagax Sewer, and I'm going to use it to paint the leather seat. I'm going for a one-hit wonder here, so I'm going to be really careful to do a nice even layer, making sure there's enough paint to run into those recesses, but not so much that it's going to pool and dry in strange ways. So where it has pooled, I need to check that when it dries, I'm happy with it to look the way it is at that point. So I'm just moving it around, maneuvering it with my brush. His bum's going to be glued on this. You're hardly going to see anything. Last thing I'm going to do is spend ages highlighting it, so this will do. Now this is a two thin coats triad, Sentient Turquoise, Cursed Blue and Ray Gun Glow. Now the lowest tone, the shade, is very much like the Kellen Green we've used, or very similar, so we can use the mid-tone and the highlight to work up from that contrast base coat. I'm using a lot of two thin coats at the moment, and they compare really well to Citadel in terms of the colour range. In my opinion, they're just a little bit better. The dropper bottles really help keep that paint in a condition that you want to use it. I just find them really consistent and really, really easy to use. But they have a really handy conversion chart as well, because they're so close to that Citadel range, and you can find that on the Transatlantic Games website. But you have Sentient Turquoise, Cursed Blue and Ray Gun Glow, which is what we're looking at here, would be 1,000 Suns Blue, Araman Blue and Baharoth Blue. So if you want to convert what I'm saying here over to your Citadel range, if you're a Citadel user, you should find that quite easy. And of course you can do that with any of the two thin coats paints that I mentioned in this video. I won't always call out the Citadel alternative, but you see what I'm doing here is using that mid-tone and the highlight, just essential layer painting, building up a highlight each time, leaving that darker colour in the recesses, which in this case is the Kellen Green contrast paint. You may even find that mixing the mid and the highlights together and getting a mid-tone in between will work for you as well, so you can really build that layering up with subtle highlights rather than that really kind of glaring jump to the top highlight. Another two thin coats tryout, we have Argonaut Skin, Kronos Flesh and Ares Flesh, and again triads are really great to use because they give you the colours straight out. You don't have to go searching around or what works well with this. If you like to paint simply, they are perfect for it. And two thin coats aren't the only range that make triads. Even Army Painter have their 6 triads. I don't quite understand how that works in terms of a naming thing, but in terms of a group of colours that work together, it's really, really handy if you struggle to know what colours to match up. And these are just the same. So I'm working in with that base layer first, giving a nice even coat all over. It goes over really easy because we've almost got a white base to it. And after that smooth base coat, you're just building up with that mid-tone and the highlights of the raised areas. So the nose, the cheekbones, the tops of those muscle constructions, mid-tone first, mixing a little bit of that top highlight in, and then a little bit of the top highlight on its own, decreasing the amount each time so you can see all of the different colours in the variations of the blends. This is Shaiish Purple and Vulpus Pink from the Contrast range, and those of you who've been following my painting tutorials a while will have seen this kind of technique using some different paints from the Vallejo Express Colours range. And what I'm really trying to do is play around with different brands of similar products and seeing how well I can get the same effects to work. And this is really an alternative to adding a flesh wash. I've already built up the flesh tones with 3 different layers already. I don't like adding washes too much. I think they look a little bit too dirty at the end. So this is a different way of adding colour and variation to the skin. So I prefer to do it with glazes, and that's why I've thinned them. But I'm just glazing into the recesses with the more purplish tone, the colder tone, so it adds some shadow, and then you add a little bit of the pinker tone to certain areas as well. And if you look at your skin, there's all kinds of colours going on there. If you've got pale skin, you can see greens and blues as your skin is translucent, and this kind of replicates that a little bit. The skin isn't just one flat colour, and there's lots of different tones under there. You can skip this completely if you want to. You can go even heavier and use some green contrast paints and glaze some of those in as well, because they look fantastic at the same time. Generally at the end, I'll go back in with that top highlight of skin and just pick out any areas that I think have been dulled down a little bit too much by the glaze, just to make them really pop out. And you can mix backwards and forwards again, adding a bit more glaze, adding a bit of a top highlight until you're happy with the final result. So a bit of Two Thin Coats Wizard Grey now. We've got those grey jeans, those grey trousers. I'm just adding a couple of subtle edge highlights here, or a couple of line highlights where you can see the detail in the folds. There's not a lot there. There's not a lot going to be visible anyway once he's glued into his seat. This time I am turning to a Citadel pot paint, and it's Layer Phalanx Yellow. I don't have anything in my Two Thin Coats range at the moment that's quite bright enough for this job. Thinning the paint quite a lot here, about 50%, because I don't want it to look dry and streaky. And this paint, while great, it can be a little bit chalky if you're not careful. So I'm just getting to the top highlights of those yellow areas, which is already built in there a little bit anyway, because we use contrast paints, so it's already a little bit lighter on those raised flat surfaces. So I'm just kind of enhancing that a little bit now with a very thin, almost a glaze layer of this Phalanx Yellow. This is Cygor Brown from the Citadel Contrast range. It's one of my favourite base coats for sort of a browny leather boots and things at the moment. I just love this colour. It's got some nice warm red tones in it, and it's really fun to highlight up afterwards, which we'll see in a moment. But I'm just building around the bottom parts of the boots here. There's some armour on there which I'm leaving white to match the shoulder pads and that kind of thing. And I'll also be applying it to his gloves as well. This is Cuirass Leather and Boar Hide, again from the Two Thin Coats range. It's actually a base and mid-tone from a triad, and I find they work really well with that Cygor Brown. So the base tone is the first perfect layer here. It's quite reddish in tone when you first paint it on, but it does dull down quite quickly, and it just works so nicely in conjunction with that contrast paint. It's working my way around all of those leather areas, leaving quite large areas of shadow in the recesses and gaps, so picking out the tops of the fingers, a couple of areas on the tops of the gloves, but I want them to look quite worn, and that kind of damp effect, that kind of greasy effect that leather can get. And then we finish off with the mid-tone in this case, but the top highlight, which is even more red, but once it settles down and dries in, it just looks so pleasing as this really rich kind of reddish leather. Trying to work on some beards, so this is some Griffhound orange contrast paint, and this chap over his what is very white beard at the moment, just painting this in, and it's great. It goes right into those recesses. You could almost leave it. You got that little subtle natural highlight that's already built in from using the contrast style paint. I do add a few thin highlights using the Satyr Brown from the Two Thin Coats range. So back to black metal from the scale colour metallic range, and also Game Air Silver. And after the little bit of dry brushing on the armour of the miniature, there was a slight silver tone to the glasses, the shades. I was originally going to paint them either a green colour or even that sort of sunset reflection looking colour, but I just decided I think they might look quite cool as sort of 80s style mirrored shades, and that's what I've gone with. So the darker colour on first, and while it's still wet, just wet blending in a top highlight using the Game Air Silver. I like to use warp lightning and a lot of displays or lights and things for my 40k style miniatures. I find it really easy over metallics like this. I have added a little bit of white underpaint to these, just little marks that when you apply the contrast warp lightning, they show through and look like it is underlit, a bit like a cheating way of painting a backwards jewel or lens effect. And it's surprising how effective it is. And again, this is about having effective results that are quick and easy to do. Same with the little displays on the panel. I've put some white squiggles down first, and then I just add this warp lining over the top. You can always add a touch of little gloss varnish as well, and it really finishes it off. I didn't want to add too much bloom effect on the metallics, but we have some Nazdrag yellow here, so I'm just going to paint in a little bit of yellow on the fronts of the weapons and on the ends of the exhaust. I'm not going to go down the spectrum with reds and purples and blues. They're so small, and I didn't want to go over the top, but just adding a little bit of Nazdrag yellow, just rinsing my brush off a little bit, getting a little bit damp, and then just wet blending it out or feathering it out into the body of the gun. As mentioned, exactly the same technique on those exhausts at the back. Now for some chipping. This is Cuirass Leather from the Two Thin Coats range, very similar to something like a Rhinox hide really, which is what I would use up until getting into this range of paints. Now I have got the more traditional style sponging, so cheap grey sponge that you'd find in a blister pack. Same tool from Knott's Hobbies. There's a link in the video description for those, and you can actually get 5% off if you purchase through that link. But just sponging on a few little effects to look like chipping, and it just really stands out on that nice white armour plate. Now, these are ready mixed oil washes from Soilworks or Scale 75. We have dark mud and we have grease. Now the grease is a sepia-ish tone, a bit like a cross between Seraphim Sepia and Agrax Earthshade. The dark mud effect is a little bit like a much darker Agrax Earthshade, much more brown in there. And I'm using that on all of the metallic areas to make the engine look grimy and dirty. And then I'll use the grease colour on all of the white armour plates. And the reason I'm using these oil washes is just because I prefer them to standard washes. You can play around with these a little bit more. When they dry, they go into the recesses and look a little bit like weathering. They don't sit on the surfaces as much, so you don't get that tide marking and that pooling. And even when they do, you can wipe them off again with a little bit of clean Artist White Spirit. So I tend to use these in place of nearly all my washes at the moment. There's no gloss varnish protection going on these. These are ready mixed. They're very, very subtle and very, very kind to your paint jobs, unless you absolutely soak your miniature in them and yet you haven't primed your miniature properly. I am using old brushes. You definitely want to do that. They don't smell very much at all either, but you do want to take a little bit of care, but you would do anyway if you are painting miniatures and you've got paints out on the table. So it's definitely something I still think you could comfortably get out on your kitchen table with the suitable protections for your painting tables and all of those other things. So if you haven't given oil washes a go, I definitely recommend giving them a try. So we come on to that armour panel. I'm very much aiming around where the detail is, allowing it to run into the recesses. I'm not slapping it all over the flats of the panels. I could do, and it would wipe off fine, which is, again, is that difference I mentioned. But I'm focusing around the edges of those panels. And you'll find that when it settles, it looks great and it just dries really, really nicely. You'll see here, I'm just adding the same effects, the grease, into the armour on this squat himself. And you'll also notice that it's all over the base. I've used some basing textures from Vallejo. It's basing texture mixes, so there's earth mixture and so on and so on. If you'd like to know the recipe, just ask me in the comments below and I'll let you know. But it's very similar to a Sterling mud kind of mix, and we all base our armies differently, so I don't always go into all the different colour lists of those because we'll have our own schemes and our own ideas. This is Artist White Spirit. This one is from AK. You can pick them up from lots of different brands. You do want that instead of your B&Q kind of thinners, because they do smell and they will strip the paint off your miniatures. This is much more subtle. You can pick up Sansador in your local artist shop for oil paints and things as well. But I'm using a clean brush and a little bit of the White Spirit, and I can just, anywhere that's pooled, anywhere that I don't want that oil paint, I can go back in and almost clean it away with this Artist White Spirit. And that's the joy, the thing that you can't do with your standard washes like Agrax Earthshade and so on. So you see now it's had a little while to dry. I blasted it with a hairdryer as well. You can take 24 hours for oil paints to fully set, so you really see the effect after that, but you can speed them up. But I'm doing a final little dry brush now because it dulls it down in places. I just want to go back and reinforce that little bit of worn silver effect that's on some of the metallics. So right back to that Game Air silver, a little bit on the end of my brush, and not all over, just picking out a couple of things just to really make the miniature stand out and pop. And this is why I talked about not doing too much more on the wheels, because I'm brushing in dry pigment here, which will get in all that detail and look fantastic, but there's no point in doing other painting first. This is a dark yellow ochre and a light sienna colour, and I brush it into the detail on the textured base as well, and just blow off all the excess, and it sticks in absolutely fine. But the effect it gives looks fantastic, looks really weathered and grim. I love it. And then after that, I'll just add a few tufts, paint my rim black, and he's done. But let's go and have a look at some proper pictures. Now this really took me back to my teenage years, and those trikes and those bikes back then looked very different, and I painted them very different. Red, I think. They definitely didn't look very good, but I still wish I had those miniatures. They go for a lot on eBay now, but somehow they've managed to look completely different and modern GW, but I've captured that vibe, and that's really cool, and the designers deserve applause for that. They've done a brilliant job with them, and I really enjoyed painting these miniatures. Hopefully you're looking forward to picking them up yourself if you're watching this video, because I think they're just great and you'll have so much fun doing them. So I can definitely recommend them from a review point of view. They are cool miniatures that go together really well and paint up really well as well. There's not too many complicated parts on here that make you want to pull your hair out doing them. Let me know what you
think of the paint job. Let me know if you're going to be using these in an army. I'm really tempted to try and do a small Votann force. I only play 40k with my son in a very casual kind of way, so I can really lean into anything I want to. I quite like the idea of getting a lot of these and getting a lot of the prospectors, which will be coming up on a future video, so look out very soon for one of the new exo-kyn tutorials as well. Using some of those and mixing them in with Votann and making a very squat style army. So if any of you play 40k and have got some ideas about that, get in touch in the comments below, send me an email, send me a message on any of my social media and things like that, because really like some ideas, because I don't know 40k very well. I play so casually and I definitely don't know much about Votann, even though I think I've got some coming for my birthday in a couple of weeks.
Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I had so much fun painting squats for the first time in more than 35 years, maybe, definitely far too long. So thank you very much to Games Workshop for sending them over to me to have a look at that little bit early. If you've enjoyed the video, please do give it a like, drop a comment below. It really helps the video. Consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, and check out all the other videos. So many different game systems covered, loads of hobby and painting tutorials, lots of commentary and other things as well. There's loads of links in my video description and ways of supporting the channel. There's affiliate links in there for airbrushes and hobby tools like dry brushes from Knott's Hobbies, that kind of thing. There's also the channel sponsors you'll find as well. There's a friendly Discord for the channel that you can join, and probably most importantly, if you really want to support the channel, is a link to my Patreon, which really is the best way you can support me and help me continue to make videos like this. There's 4 different tiers on there. They're very basic at the bottom, it just helps me going and shows your support, and the top level you can actually have one-to-one painting coaching or tuition with me over Zoom. So do check those out if that's something you're interested in. But thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.